Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Embracing Your Virtue. For those of you joining for the first time, I am your lovely host, Samantha Jasmine. It's Women's History Month, everyone. Woohoo! Let's celebrate the ladies. And so this month, I wanted to use my podcast to profile some amazing women, boss chicks that are making moves in their career and also making a difference. So today's guest is Miia Torera. Miia is an attorney and an author. She has over a decade, I believe, of experience practicing corporate law before she bravely decided to pursue her other dream of becoming a writer. And thus, the ISA comic book series was born. So, the series features three preschool heroes: the Incredible I, Starboy, and the Amazing Amaziah, whose heroic and entertaining adventures are only outmatched by their imagination. Her stories are fun, they're age appropriate, and most importantly, they feature characters of color. Miia is the first Black female children's comic book writer. She's a world traveler. And last but certainly not least, she is a wife and mom to an amazing family. Miia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on another podcast. It's a new world for me to be on podcasts, but any opportunity that comes up, I'm just like a kid in a candy store, like a podcast, a podcast. I can't believe my voice is going to be on the internet. But again, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. And it's an honor for you to be on my show. And hey, podcasts are new for me too. So it's exciting overall. So I think what really intrigued me about your story is the fact that your career change was very drastic, right? Like you didn't go from being a corporate lawyer to like, oh, now I'm going to be like an adjunct professor and teach law at a college. Like you went to completely different field. And I think that's what really stuck out to me. And I think as someone who's kind of doing the same thing, I went from corporate HR and doing about 12 years in that to now trying to do this podcast game. I wanted to really talk about your journey throughout your career and how you've gotten to where you are now, and hopefully inspire some women who may want to do the same. So why don't
Yeah.
we start? Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your career background?
So ever since I was a kid, maybe about 4 years old or so, I knew that I wanted to write. And back then, I thought that those who write should do it in some sort of professional setting. I knew that I liked arguing and was told I was pretty persuasive as a child. And everyone would say, "Are you going to be a lawyer when you grow up?" And I say, "Yes, I will." Um, but even as a child, I wrote stories. I would win like these little writing competitions in school. And I grew up in Nigeria, and there's a very heavy emphasis there on when you have a child in school that they do one of the big three professions, right? Which is doctor, lawyer, engineer. At some point, maybe accountant was part of it, but I think now it's like doctor, lawyer, engineer. If your child isn't going to be one of those three, what are they doing? I did come from a family that had lawyers, and my mother was a lawyer as well. And my grandparents were in the writing field, my grandfather in particular. And so my parents on my mother's side had grown up in that whole academia lifestyle, being on a university campus, acting in plays, being part of theater and arts world. So it wasn't unusual to them that I enjoyed writing. On my dad's side, however, not so much. Inclined towards the arts, more towards like social sciences. But I think my parents would have been accepting if I'd said, you know what, I'm going to go read. We call it read, but here you'd say study. If I'm going to go study English and major in creative writing. I didn't, but they didn't like try to force it down my throat. A lot of my friends who were very creatively inclined were forced to become like doctors or forced to become engineers, and they still face that struggle today. But my family has been super supportive of all my writing endeavors, as well as my journey towards becoming a lawyer. So I thought as a writer, I should become a lawyer, use my voice, use my writing to help those who are oppressed, help those who seek justice, and I will pursue this and continue writing. So it was never a dichotomy for me, like be a writer or be a lawyer. In my mind, I was both. Um, Went to college, studied politics, went on to law school, graduated from law school, and then went into corporate law. And throughout, one message I would keep getting as I kept my writing was, why are you in law? You should just focus on writing. But again, like to me, it just wasn't a binary issue. Like I'm always going to be a lawyer. I went to law school, I passed the bar. I'm always going to be a lawyer.
Right.
And I'm always going to be a writer because nothing stops you from picking up your pen or picking up your laptop and writing. So when the decision came about last year to leave the corporate law setting, I then thought of it as now I can focus more on the writing. So it wasn't a complete departure from the law. Like I said, I'm still a lawyer and I like being a lawyer, but it was a chance for me to give something my full attention.
Yeah.
So that led me to where I am now.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for that awesome introduction. I find it so interesting that you said that your parent, even though there's kind of like this kind of cultural norm of, doctor, lawyer, engineer, that your parents were actually, would have been and have been supportive of, the creative art side.
Yeah.
It reminded me, I don't know if you've heard of the Nigerian British comedian Gina Yashir. But she's hilarious. She talks about that, how doctor, lawyer,
Oh, a
engineer.
comedian.
Yeah, she's a
Oh,
comedian,
okay.
and like, so she was born in London, but her parents are from Nigeria, and she said there was the same expectation for her to be an engineer, and she decided to be a comedian after a while. And her mother was like, "So you're going to be a clown? Like, what am I going to tell my friends?"
And you know what? Comedy has become big business in Nigeria right now. Like the top comedians are pulling in millions. They
Yeah,
perform at weddings, they perform at like political conventions.
nice.
If they have a show, you have to pay top price to get tickets to like sit front row. I think of like a whole, and it's mostly a male dominated industry for the most part,
Yep,
comedians, even here, right?
yep.
In the US. But now I think with social media, you're seeing more and more women from Nigeria coming out on the internet, and they're funny, and they don't have to go through the traditional steps. Like if you
Yes.
wanted to be a comedian, you might have had to get accepted at a comedy club, get someone to officially sponsor you as an opening act in their show. And
Right.
in these male dominated industries, then it's always, well, what are you going to do if I
Right.
let you in? And it's crazy. But thanks to the freedom of the internet, anyone can get a YouTube channel, anyone can get an Instagram channel, and be as funny as you want to be. All you need to do is just attract viewers, which is hard enough.
Right.
But they have these platforms. So I have a lot of Nigerian comedian women who I follow on YouTube and Instagram, and they're just so funny, so funny. And it's just a joy to watch, especially the Christian ones,
Oh,
because
nice.
they keep it clean,
Yeah.
and you're still like laughing your butt
Mhm.
off
Yeah.
because they're hilarious. But yeah, sorry, I digress. I went into this whole
No,
spiel
no.
on comedians.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, you're gonna have to send me a few links after this because I definitely want to
Yes.
check it out. Yeah, but no, I think that's so cool that your parents were actually cool with that. And one of the other things that you mentioned was, I love the fact that you said like you're still a lawyer, you're still a writer, you're just focusing more one on the other. I think going back to your time as a lawyer, were you able to kind of fulfill that desire you had to use your law degree for the purposes of justice and helping those in need?
Yes, I was. So one good thing about practicing law in New York, or in the US in particular, is there's a requirement at most corporate firms that lawyers volunteer at least a set amount of hours minimum every year. And every year I would exceed that by hundreds, to the point where it starts to become a problem. They'd say you're doing too much pro bono work. I don't really know how to charge. I mean, yes, I work for a firm, but if someone calls me up and says, hey, I have this legal question or I have this legal issue, what do you think? I'm not going to say pay me. Because to me, my ability to navigate through the law is my talent, right? And I'm called upon as a Christian to use my talents for the honor and glory of God. Um, so doing pro bono work for me is an extension of me as a Christian. I'm a Christian and I'm a lawyer. How can I use the law to further the work of Christ, to further the gospel? It's by working for the poor, helping those who cannot help themselves. It could be anything as innocent as helping someone call up an agency and using what I call my lawyer voice, and I'd say, "This is, I'd say my name, and I'd say I'm an attorney, and I'm representing so and so, and this person has informed me that they've requested that you replace the fridge in their apartment, and despite repeated requests, and once they hear attorney, suddenly the fridge shows up the next day.
Right,
But
right,
before that, they would have just thought, well, here's this person, she doesn't speak English, or she's just a poor immigrant. We're just gonna ignore her requests. And
right,
then when they hear a lawyer is involved, I may not even be that involved,
right. Yeah.
but I made the call. So anything from that to last week, I was helping someone with a green card application, someone who's new to the country and has been through a lot. Helping someone face CPS. And a lot of times I'm sort of thrown out of my comfort zone because it may be an area I don't know a lot about.
Okay.
I mostly know corporate litigation for the most part, or things that have to do with courts. I'm not a contract reader. It's hard for me to say you should ask for this or that, but I do have the basic training and I can find someone who does know.
Right,
So I'll call
right.
up my friends and say, hey, you specialize in this. I have a question from a friend. Can you help me figure it out for this friend of mine or this person that I'm helping? So I've done everything from like domestic violence cases, immigration cases, people who were not paid at their jobs and had their wages docked. Done international pro bono work, a lot of stuff related to the genocide in Rwanda, done a lot of international legal work in Africa, especially because that's near and dear to my heart. But yeah, the whole gamut, and I really love it. To me, it's very personal. It's easy to just sit behind a laptop and work for corporations and this disagreement and that disagreement. But when you do one-on-one pro bono work, you get to see the effect that your work has on someone's life. It's the difference in making sure someone gets that house,
Yes.
or doesn't get thrown out of their house, right?
Right.
And when you see the impact directly, it makes it all the more worthwhile to be a lawyer.
Nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. See, I don't know if your friends knew about this because now they might hear this and be like, oh, Mia's helping people. Let me call her.
They're already doing it. It's so
All right.
funny. Oh, it reminds me, I have a text I'm supposed to respond to.
Yeah.
Note to self. But yeah, it's a good feeling, and I'm always grateful that God gave me the opportunity to become a lawyer. It's not an easy path, and it's expensive, but God was always faithful. He provided when I didn't think He would provide. And so in knowing that God provided a way for me to get that opportunity, how then can I turn around and deny others the same access and opportunities?
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen. What do you think? What was your biggest kind of challenge as a lawyer? I just think like, even, I mean, I think that Black women are showing up in the legal field in the droves now. And it's always been a field where I think we've been in, but more and more and more. Um, as someone that kind of started in a game maybe 10 plus years ago, what was your biggest challenge in coming out of law school? You just passed the bar and establishing yourself as a new lawyer.
I would say, because I went straight into the corporate setting, the hardest part for me was adjusting from being a student to being a part of corporate America. It's a big change. Law school, you might be going to class in your pajamas, it's rough. Everyone just expects you to study and get the grades. But in a corporate work setting, there's a whole slew of expectations that are put upon you that you have to figure out how to meet. It's not enough to just do your work. You might need to rainmake, for example, which means bring business to the company or to the firm, because I was at a firm. You might also have to do a lot of I call it schmoozing. I can't think of a and there's also a lot of politics involved in terms of getting people who can support you in your career.
Yep.
And that is very difficult. One, as a woman. Two, as a Black woman. Three, as an immigrant. Four, as a Christian. There's just so many different things that I am, which can pose a lot of difficult challenges. So I'll give an example, not from my office, but a friend who worked at a investment bank used to talk to me about how a lot of times after work, their bosses would say, we're going to a strip club and we're going to go woo a client at the strip club.
Yeah.
This was a few years ago. I think now people try not to do that because of just everything that's going on in current events. But, this person would always be in this awkward position where I want to do well at work, but I'm being asked to do something that I morally object to. I don't want to go to a strip club. I don't want to, keep taking shots until I'm completely wasted and drunk. And yet I feel like the people who are looking at my career want to know that I'm a team player or one of the boys, quote unquote. And that was challenging. And this person was male, right? How much worse is it when you are a woman or you're a mom? And you need to get home. Your babysitter's not going to wait for you to be out clubbing all night.
Yep.
Yes, it's for work, but the babysitter does not care. They have a home to get to too. And you want to see your children. And you definitely don't want to be in the strip club either, because who knows? And sometimes drugs would come up in this context. A lot of people don't understand just how much drugs and alcohol play a role in corporate America. So these things would come up and you'd see it in your career. Maybe there's an office party and someone is really, really drunk and acting in a very inappropriate way, but it was almost like encouraged at times. And so it was a challenge. And so you want to be professional, but you also want to keep your nose clean, literally.
Yeah, literally, right? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that about your corporate experience. I can totally understand and relate to that. And I think even from my own personal experience, it was all the things that you mentioned about, being a woman, being a Christian, being a person of color, and being a mom. And then adding on to that, even sometimes economics, right? I just did not come or have the same base setting as a lot of my coworkers, where we were still like saving up to buy a place, and it's like I couldn't relate to conversations about adding the third floor to my house or the frustrations when their hot tub was broken, and I was just like, oh, yeah, I could imagine, Bob.
Can I tell you a joke about that?
Sure.
So I graduated from law school, but I had loans and I needed to pay them off pretty quickly. And I met someone at my law firm who we called her just the ultimate gangster, in the sense that she was like, I'm here, I'm going to pay off these loans and I'm going to pay them off in 2 years. Now, loans usually have like a 20 to 30 year lifespan.
Yeah.
And I met this person. I thought, you are crazy. How are you going to pay off a 6-figure loan in 2 years?
Yeah.
This woman, to this day, I think of her with all the fondness. She told me, one, she doesn't have an apartment. She rented a room in someone's house. She didn't have a bed. She just had a mattress. This is a corporate lawyer. Okay.
Wow.
She had a mattress. She never bought groceries. She would work late at the firm. Whatever food was left over from the food that you're allowed to order, because the firm would pay for it, would be her breakfast and lunch for the next day.
Wow.
And that is how she had no internet, no TV, no cable, none of that. And that's how she paid it off, living like the bare minimum, basically, that you can live in New York. And I remember thinking, you're crazy. But then when she paid it off, I thought, teach me your ways. Let me
Yes.
sit at your feet. I need to learn how to do this. And so I embarked on the same course. So when you say you couldn't relate, I get it. I would tell people, when I would leave the house, I would unplug everything. I never turned on any lights when I got home for like the first, 5, 6 years of my career.
Mm-hmm.
I cut off the internet. If I needed to use the internet, I'd be in the office and
Yeah.
then I'd go back home. Even water usage was down to a minimum. I went basically as cutthroat as I could,
Yeah.
inspired by this person. And she and I were both Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And the others we would tell about this would be like, you're crazy. I can't relate. Can't your parents just help you? And I say, my parents?
Yeah.
First of all, they're not even earning dollars. They're earning a
Yeah.
different currency altogether. They can send me their prayers.
Yeah. Exactly.
and, and so I did that for a few years and lived with a very, very tight budget. And then was able to pay off the loans. Not in her 2 years. I allowed myself to have an apartment,
Yeah.
but I paid it off maybe in like six years or so. And when I finally paid it off, I think I had a post on Facebook that said, the greatest feelings in my life were passing the bar, getting married, giving my life to Jesus. But the minute I paid off those loans,
Mm.
it really felt like the shackles had come off of me
Yes.
and I was free to live life, like
Mm-hmm.
to even think about things like maybe buying a house someday, right?
Yes.
Or leaving the country or changing careers even if I wanted to,
Right.
because
Right.
financial slavery is real and
Yes.
it is a problem here
Yeah.
in this country because everything is credit based. We're really like tied up
Mm-hmm.
our entire lives and I'm using slavery being sensitive to the to the word because it brings on so much connotations, but we really are under this heavy burden. It's a heavy chain and it's so hard to unshackle yourself from it in your lifetime,
Yes.
and very few people will. So I consider myself blessed
Yes.
to have been able to do that. But I know people who are still in that corporate setting who
Mm-hmm.
there's no hope in sight. Like maybe their situation just didn't even allow for the kind of like cost cutting that I was able to do. I was single when
Yeah.
I did this, but you can't put your children through that, right?
Right.
There's only you have to buy diapers for your babies, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to put food in their bellies, so
Yeah.
I had colleagues who maybe had 2, 3 kids and their kids had to go to school and maybe their wife wasn't working so that they could work long hours at the firm, because
Yeah.
there's also that issue too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult. Like they're still trying to pay it off.
Yeah.
I don't take it for granted that I was able to do that, and I really thank God because it really just allowed me to do so much more that I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't have done before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know this is not the topic of the show, but I think that is so important to highlight. And the
Mm-hmm.
same thing, Leon and I, when we were, newly married, we realized like we needed to do something drastic to position ourselves financially. And we didn't have student debt, but we had other stupid debt, right? um, for lack of a better term. And we lived with family for like 3.5 years, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a year and a half of that was with my firstborn. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hard. Like, I mean, yeah, we had the comfort of a room in someone's
Mm-hmm.
nice house, but
Mm-hmm.
living as grown folk in other people's house has
Yeah.
its own challenges. Um,
Yeah.
but I think because of that, I can have this like for those of you listening, it is a weekday. It is in the middle of the day. And I'm like, I can have this podcast time with you now because of the financial sacrifices that we made before.
Yes.
Because even when we had
Yes.
two incomes, we positioned ourselves to live off of one just in
Mm-hmm.
case. And now that I'm able to kind of venture, it gave me the freedom to venture into my own projects and to have
Mm-hmm.
this time because we have that nest egg and we've set ourselves
Yeah.
up because of that sacrifice. So
Praise
for all
God.
you, yeah, and shameless plug, listeners, go back to my January broadcast, go to my website because I do have a whole blog on ways to cut costs. So even if you can't do what Miia has done or what I have done, there's so many other ways that you can cut costs and try to position yourselves financially as best you can. So yeah, that was a plug for that. But let's get back to the topic at hand. So let's talk about what inspired you to focus more on your writing than your legal practice? And how did you get there?
COVID.
COVID. Please speak
I
more to
joke. I mean, I had, like I said, I'd always maintained my writing. I think before I left, even you saw the stuff some of the stuff I'd done before I officially launched, quote unquote. And not just writing for children, like I did writing for, a more adult audience. I'd had a blog that did pretty well, and had been invited to ghostwrite for people, and write scripts, for for comedians, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, and so every time those opportunities came my way, I would sort of hide from them, or shun them, because I kept thinking I'm so busy with my legal practice, and I have kids. I can't juggle all of this. But then COVID came around, and it really reminded me, even though in the Bible we are reminded that life is short, until something happens, you don't know how short life is. And so COVID came around, and it literally felt like the world was ending. And I thought, well, it is going to end. Let me just do the things let me go through my bucket list. And people had encouraged me over the years, just do this, just do this. You don't even need to do law. Obviously, they didn't know my finances, or even that I enjoyed being a lawyer. But when COVID came around, I took that, and I left the firm and took that step. My first thought was, just do this, 100%, see what happens. And it wasn't in the goal of doing this and becoming an overnight star. There are no true overnight stars. There's a lot of work that goes into everything, and being able to be consistent and plug away and keep at it. And suddenly I now had more time, so there was no excuse. So I sat down, started rewriting scripts. And again, these children's comic books that I did, there aren't many women writing comic books. There aren't many Black women writing comic books. There are a few, but not many when you compare it. I go to Comic Cons and I go to comic book conventions every year, and I know what the crowd looks like. We're fans, but we're not the decision makers. We're not on the producer lists. We're not, we're not there. There's a lack of representation there. But we will show up at these fan conventions, grown women, young women. I've seen 80-year-old women at conventions I go to dressed up, and we're all like geeking out over this and that. But I wanted to be behind the scenes for once. And I said, I can do it. Yeah, okay, fine. I don't work at Marvel, or I don't work at DC. So what? It's a free world now. There's the internet. I'm going to do it and put it out and just see what happens, because everyone's been encouraging me over the years. And what's the worst that could happen? It doesn't sell.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I never did it to sell to begin with. I used to just do it for a small audience. And so COVID just gave me that push, and I did it.
Nice. So how did you come up specifically with the Incredible Eye series?
So you're the first to hear this. The name might change, but for now it's the Incredible Eye, the ISA. So it's the Incredible Eye, it's Starboy and Amazing Amazia. I was looking at children playing one day, and also thinking about, how Black Panther came out and everyone was so excited, and he was like, yes, finally. Very few people know that Black Panther as a comic book has been around since the 60s.
Yep.
I think everyone understood that it was a new movie, but they didn't know that it was actually created by Stan Lee. He's not African or Black, but he's the famous comic book writer. And it saddened me that it wasn't what I call a FUBU situation, for us by us, to date myself. And I thought, look, I want to write something and create something that reflects the environment I live in, and one that my children will live in, and so many other children will live in, right? One, I grew up in a country where everyone had brown skin, right? I never had, at least parts of my life were lived in a space where I was not a minority.
Mm.
And so the way I write and the way I feature my characters isn't coming from the minority space or
Yeah.
mindset. It's this is their world. This is what it looks like. Deal with it. um,
Yeah.
so I wanted to write something that reflected them, where also they could be free of the things that we so often put on children, and when we write for minority children. So I didn't want to write a book about slavery or civil rights movement or anything related to police violence or any of the current challenges that we're all dealing with.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be like this safe space
Yeah.
where no one's coming after you for the color of your skin, where you are a hero,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And the focus of you being a hero isn't that you're Black, it's that you have these super amazing powers. And also, you're a kid. Because
Right.
what child doesn't want to see themselves as an adventurer or heroic? And I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of times we deny Black children in particular that right to feel like heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can have innocent childhood fantasies and dreams. We always weigh them with the burden of reality, even when
Yeah.
we draw them in these spaces. So I wanted to do something that took them out of reality. It's a fantasy world,
Right.
okay?
Right.
Because the
That's
real
what
world
comics
is not.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, and let's make it a fantasy world. Although so many comics these days are pretty dark, but I also wanted it to be for kids. A
Yeah.
lot of comics say they're for kids, or they just shrink the age of an adult character
Mm-hmm.
and feed it to children. But I wanted this to be first and foremost for kids, um, featuring kids, of kids, about kids, and viewing the world the way they do. So in The Incredible I Enter the Mummy, I was playing around with the idea of making them pretend heroes as opposed to real heroes.
Mm.
But then by Chocolate Crisis, I'm like, no, you're real heroes. So in Incredible Eye, you see them, fighting this battle, and at the end of the day, they're back in their house, right?
Yeah.
And you're not sure whether it was real or not. Kind of like Muppet Babies, the way they would
Right.
have these adventures, but it was always just in their nursery, and they never really left the nursery. But with Chocolate Crisis, I'm like, no, I had decided by then they're going to be full-fledged heroes, and they're going to come out of this space where they're in their parents' household, and they're going to go save the world, and they're going to save the world in a way that's meaningful to kids. What
Mm.
does saving the world look like when you're a kid? It's not fighting terrorists or stopping nuclear bombs. It's saving chocolate cookies and making
Right.
sure everyone has access to chocolate cookies,
Yeah.
because your problems ideally should be in that low space where
Yeah.
your issues, your battles are child specific, and your enemies are these teddy bear villains and
Right. Or
evil mummies,
bedtimes.
yeah, or scary clowns or bedtimes, right?
Right.
And your evil nemesis isn't, a genocidal alien. I'm
Yeah.
not going there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
so
man.
yeah, that's why I did it.
I love it. It was so refreshing to have that as a comic book option for my kids because they love the concept of superheroes. They have all the Marvel characters. They've had all the Marvel kind of superhero toys before they've
Hmm.
ever seen any of the Marvel actual
Movies or
cartoons or movies
cartoons,
or any of
same.
that because they're way too violent. My
Yeah,
oldest is only 6 and I'm just like,
yeah.
yeah, and even now, because he has friends and just
Hmm.
because, if I do have those moments where I turn my back and he YouTube scrolls and I'm not looking,
Precisely.
and
You're
so the
right. You're right.
the comics come up or those things come up and
Hmm.
and now I'm having to have conversations about why
Hmm.
guns are not appropriate and
Yep.
we don't even like gun toys, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you're and I don't have this conversation with my son, but I'm
Same.
like,
Yeah.
you're a Black kid, you cannot have a gun toy. Like,
Yeah.
there's all these
I
other
know. I know.
implications. But
It's.
I'm also, yeah, having to have those conversations about like, no, we don't have to shoot bad guys, right?
Hmm.
Like there's
Hmm.
other ways to stop bad things from happening than
Hmm.
violence.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you raise a good point. I made it a point in my comics not for them to be using their powers to hurt people, even the
Mhm.
bad guys. They're using their powers in more creative ways. One of the characters, Amazing Amazia, has super strength.
Mm.
So I don't have him using the super strength to beat people or
Right.
knock them around, but I might have him use his super strength to close a hole
Yeah.
or to lift something that's in the way of something else. I'm purposeful. I'm trying to be very purposeful because I did feel the same way. I have a huge comic book collection, and sometimes my son would pick up one and say, well, why is Wolverine stabbing someone in the stomach with
Yeah.
those sharp knives? And it's different if you're an adult and you can understand, but even I, as an adult, I don't enjoy the violence necessarily. I don't. Um, I like good guys winning, yeah,
Right.
and I like heroics, but I don't like decapitation, and I don't like,
Yeah.
disembowelment. So
Right.
I don't put that in my stories. Again, I want it to be child friendly and a safe space so parents can feel safe leaving one of my books in their kids' hands and not having to explain why this person now has a black eye or why this person now looks dead. Okay,
Yes.
so no one dies in my comics either.
Yes. Yeah. No, I love that. That was the first thing I noticed about it. And I was like, yes, thank you. Like just
You're
a
welcome.
safe alternative, a safe superhero for young kids. And I love the idea
Mhm,
about, problem solving and just all of the different things that they're doing to
mhm.
save the day.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. I want to ask, from this whole transition of putting yourself out there and taking on this venture, what did you learn about yourself in the process? And what advice would
Mhm.
you have for women who may be thinking about starting something new?
I learned that I am very impatient.
Mm,
I think it's important to learn what your faults are whenever you embark on anything. And my impatience led me to make quite a few mistakes as I started. And then when you're impatient, you're not patient with your mistakes either. As soon as you
yeah.
fix it, you're like, all right, so let me reprint this. And then you find another mistake. And mistake after mistake is costly. You might have printed off, I remember I sold about maybe like several hundred copies, and I had to get the printer to print them so I could send them off to where I'd sold them. And in my rush, I missed something major, right?
Mm,
Maybe not major to the reader, but to me.
yeah. Yeah.
um, and someone thankfully pointed it out. And I always welcome this feedback because your feedback makes you stronger and better.
Yeah.
Good feedback, not negative feedback.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, wow, I just wasted all this money. Why wasn't I patient if I just given myself another day or another hour to check over my work? And that's something being a lawyer taught me too, which is check over your work, triple check, double check. It's going to a client. They're paying good money for this. You got to make sure you're doing your best.
Right.
Also, being impatient made me consider things that I probably shouldn't have considered. So something came my way where I was being offered a chance to turn my work into like a movie deal. Um, or like a cartoon series.
Mm,
And immediately it came my way. I was like, oh yeah, sure, sure, sure. But when I took time to think about it some more and think, is this really what I want? Actually, I think I want to actually spend time developing my characters further before I sign something that locks me up,
right.
and then I can't do anything with them, and they might change them from black kids to Asian kids, and what would have been the point of what I did, right?
Mhm.
Um, and you give away a lot of rights to your property when you sign those kind of contracts.
Yeah.
And they're not that financially lucrative for you as a writer anyway. Sure, it gets your name out there and now people know, but at what cost?
Right.
So for my first instinct was jump on it. Any opportunity that comes your way, jump on it, jump on it. It might not come again. But I think God has been showing me and teaching me to be patient with myself and let him lead me. And also the same God that brings certain opportunities your way will bring them your way, right?
Mhm.
You have to trust that God is in control and will direct and order your steps, especially as a Christian. Do you believe what you say you believe? You read this all
Right.
the time in the Bible, but when it comes down to practicing it, do you allow God to lead you, or do you just jump into anything
Right.
without without consideration? So I've learned that I'm impatient. I'm asking God to work on me and teach me patience. I've also learned that I can handle more than I think. Sometimes we see ourselves as very fragile.
Mhm.
We're like, if this happens, if I leave my job, it'll be over. It'll be the end of the world. It's not actually. I
Right.
was able to do so much in the year. It didn't feel like I took a year off at all. I was super busy, still doing long hours
Yeah.
with the writing, applying for fellowships. I got into a board fellowship program. It was just a lot. I did a whole lot of things, and it just taught me that life still keeps moving,
Right.
and you will move with it,
Mhm.
and you can handle it with help.
Yeah.
But it also taught me that pauses are important. A lot of times in this country, we don't value rest or restoration
Yes.
or people taking time off. When I took the time off, a lot of people called me and said, "What are you going to do now?" And they were more worried for me than I was.
Right.
And I said, "No, it's fine. I've saved enough. I'll be fine. Whatever I end up doing next." And they're like, "No, no, you can't take a break. How are you going to explain a pause of a month or 2 weeks? Girl, even a pause of 3 days, you got to explain that on your resume if you go job hunting." I was just like, well, if you end up someplace that doesn't understand that you took a pause, maybe you don't want to work there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But to push back against that takes a lot, because this is the culture we're in.
Mhm.
Work, 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 slave away until you drop,
Yep.
right? We have the least vacations of the developed countries, right? When you
Mhm.
hear what they have in Europe, you're like, goodness,
Yeah.
why don't I move to Norway?
Yeah.
And that people are encouraged to take time off, or paternity leave that was
Yeah.
unheard of, right, in the US, that they had for quite some time
Yep.
in Europe, in European countries. And here, if a father wants to take time off, it's like, are you a weakling? I remember my spouse, when he wanted to take a week off, being told by his boss, "Are you planning on breastfeeding the baby? Why do you need time off?"
Wow.
Yes, yes.
Really? Yeah.
Hmm. Right? And that's the culture we're living in.
Yeah.
So
That boils my blood.
it it boiled mine, his.
Yeah.
It was so sad. And you
Yeah.
feel powerless, you know. What can you do?
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's something, but thank you so much for sharing. I think so many people will resonate with that. What's next in store for you and for Miyato Comics?
I am world building and expanding into children's books. So not just comic book forms, but yeah, picture book forms. And that is a whole new school. I'm learning how to do that. I knew comic books for so long, and transferring that to picture books is different. And world building, I want to expand the universe. I might introduce some more characters. I really want to sit down with it and see where I can go with it, and give it my all. And like I mentioned, I am still a lawyer. So you might hear that I'm joining XYZ company in a couple months or weeks, and we'll see where that goes as well. But I'm definitely going to be maintaining this and working on it every day, giving it my all.
Nice.
Look
Any
forward
thoughts?
to.
No, that's exciting. Any thoughts on a female superhero character?
It keeps coming up in my mind. I'm like, I'm a girl. Why haven't I introduced a girl into this? It's, for me, it's, boys are different.
Mm.
From me, I grew up all girls. I didn't know boys except my dad. So it's been a challenge for me to write with male characters.
Mm.
And I've been enjoying that challenge, because it's a completely different mindset, the way I
Yeah.
approach things. If I was going to make myself a hero in the comics, my superpower would be reading books and not crashing into walls or doing
Right.
anything like that physically dangerous. But as I expanded, I definitely think I will be introducing a female character, a young girl. I won't say what the name is, or what she'll be
Right.
doing, but this is also a family of superheroes. They are
Mhm.
all related, so it may
Yes.
be another family relative that jumps in. But there are female characters. The top villain is female, and
Yeah.
that female is a reflection of me, and it's me basically trying to stop all their fun all the time.
The mom, right?
The mummy,
The
yeah.
mummy, yeah.
And she's a bad guy. I thought it'd be interesting to make the bad guy a mother figure,
Yeah.
because so often we see moms as angelic. They're so nice to their kids. They're the
Mhm.
ones the kids run to. What about one that the kids run away from, and she's a bad guy? So that was an interesting twist for me to follow. So there'll be more coming out with all those characters, but I think there will be a female character introduced at some point. I don't want my female readers or my little girl readers to feel like they're left out, like they don't see themselves either. Um, but I also, as a girl who grew up reading a lot of comics with male heroes,
Mhm.
still relate to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they're also inspired by the boys in my life.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's a girl coming.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it. Miia, thank you so much for joining us today and for just sharing your journey. Greatly appreciate it. If you guys are interested in purchasing the incredible ISA series or learning more about Miato Comics, you can do so by going to miatocomics.com. You can find the link below whenever you click on my podcast on all my different channels. You'll find the link there so you can find out more about this incredible series and, follow and look for what's coming next. If you like what you're hearing, guys, please go to iTunes and leave me a review. Please make sure to follow me on social media at Facebook and Instagram at Embracing Your Virtue. Check out my website for more resources as well as blog posts with helpful tips and tools. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.